How do you like it? I'm a novice at this. I make a few mistakes.
Jushin Thunder Liger.
I don't know.
And we are talking all things professional wrestling. He is Hutch. I am Boris. And this week, as promised, we are joined by a third person. That's right, we're doing the big WCW build. Here we are. He is a veteran wrestling journalist, historian, and author with over 2 decades of experience chronicling the world of sports entertainment, or as we like to call it, wrestling. He is a former editor at WWE Magazine and Inside Wrestling. He has written extensively on the larger-than-life personalities, events, and everything that has shaped pro wrestling over that time. He is the author of acclaimed books. This man also has a podcast, Shut Up and Wrestle, where he brings listeners into the squared circle with revealing interviews, historical deep dives, and so much more. If you're a lifelong fan or new to the business, he is your guide to the legends and legacy of professional wrestling, the personalities, and the larger-than-lifeness of all things pro wrestling. He is Brian R. Solomon. Brian, welcome back to the show.
Wow, at least some of those things have to be true, right? Thank you so much. I appreciate it. I'm glad to be back.
Yes. This is, I think, our third time chatting like this, and we've been on various stations. Now we are on KPHR. So right off the bat, I needed to give you that awesome intro to reintroduce you to not only my listeners, but to introduce you to the new listeners. Because Brian, you do so much, and really what you do is great. Because there's something that I've always said about current wrestling fans, and that's that people want to learn about the past, but oftentimes they don't know where to start.
Yeah, that's very true. But if you think about it, it's a lot easier today than it was when I was starting to get that interest. When back then, in the 90s, it was wrestling magazines that was really the place to kind of dig into the history. And that's how I first got interested in finding out what was happening, even before I was a fan, before I was born, all this kind of stuff. And, when I first discovered the internet, holy cow, and I was in college when the internet first really hit, and I was just blown away. And of course, me being me, one of the first things I look up on there is wrestling stuff. And I found all these title histories and things. It's amazing now. We take it for granted, but it's actually a lot easier today to get into it.
It really is. There's Wikipedias, there's encyclopedias online. There's so much. And Brian, there's also all of your writing. You do a fantastic job, especially on your Facebook group. And you have a great community where they post up matches. I've learned so much and seen some really cool things from your page. So thank you to not only yourself, but to your awesome community that you have. So Brian, one of those things, and right off the bat in your book, the new book that's coming out, which is all about Gorilla Monsoon, and it is called Irresistible Force, The Life and Times of Gorilla Monsoon, is you get into the fact that this is someone that you were not able to meet. So can you quickly talk about the timing of events and what day you actually had your interview?
Yeah, so, I started working for WWE in February 2000, but my first interview was in mid-October of 99. And I remember the day because it was the actual day that WWF went public on the New York Stock Exchange when they offered their IPO. So I remember that very vividly. And the thing is, I didn't put it together at the time. I mean, I knew I'd been watching, following week to week, but it was about 10 days after Gorilla Monsoon's funeral. So I missed him. And I know he was going into the TV studio. Even the last time he was in there was like 3 weeks before he died. So he was still coming in and doing voiceovers and recording things. And I just missed him. I got to cross paths with a lot of the other old guard WWF people. Freddie Blassie was still lurking around when I worked there. Arnold Skolin was still lurking around. Pat Patterson was still kind of in an advisory capacity. You'd see people like that. But Gorilla I missed. And I mentioned it in the book. One of the first things that happened when I got there is when I started working at WWE, I got an inter-office envelope that came across my desk. And people know those are those manila envelopes with the string that you tie off at the top, and they have the grid. And if you look at the grid, you could see all the other people that had the envelope before you. There's like a list because you write whoever you want to send it to, and you pass it along. And I looked at it, and at the very top of the list on the grid, it just said gorilla, just one word, gorilla. And it was one of those crazy moments you just feel like, oh my God, all this is real. This is all, I'm here, and this really happened, and he was here and everything. And that's the closest I ever got to meeting Gorilla Monsoon.
Was a birthday card for Vince McMahon in that interoffice mail? I feel like we could have done a whole episode of Seinfeld with that.
Yeah, I forget what I got the envelope for. It was sent to me. I don't know, something I had to do. I don't know, but yeah, I remember. Actually, I think I remember one year I was there that a card did go around for Vince McMahon's birthday, and everybody signed. It was like a giant card. I think it was for him. Yeah.
Yeah, I know exactly what you're talking about. We had the same in every corporate job, right? And it was something I always did too, was turn it around and look at who signed. And I remember that the CEOs from BlackBerry were like near the top at one point. So that was just one of those small things that if you have an office job, you always take a look at. So yeah, so you work for WWE Magazine. We're gonna delve into that a little bit, especially for some of our newer listeners, and one of the questions that I got from a listener was, the separation of the WWE Magazine and WWE Creative and everything that we see on TV. Was there interaction between the two sides, or was there sort of like that firewall between them?
No, there was interaction. And actually, I can speak about the time I was there. I was there from 2000 to 2007. Now, when the company was smaller, like when the magazine first started in the 80s, there was much more openness. Linda McMahon was actually hands-on as the day-to-day person overseeing the magazine. So there was much more of that, and there was much more crossover. By the time I was there were more barriers built up for sure, but there was still an effort being made to keep us plugged in, almost too much. Like Shane McMahon was running my department for most of the time I was there. He was my boss's boss, basically. And because he was Shane, he was trying very hard to keep us plugged in. He would have us present things to his dad. He would have us in boardroom meetings. He would have us, at one point, we were doing weekly meetings with the creative team, which they hated, and they hated us being in there. And we knew that, and we were being forced on them. I can sympathize with that. But there still was that effort being made. They wanted us to be in tune with where the creative was going so we could help support it. And so we didn't do anything to contradict it or hurt it.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense, and I subscribed to that magazine like in the early '90s, and it was great because it kind of felt larger than like what you're watching on TV, and then there was that magazine that made it just seem bigger. Dare I say legitimate? Like, I know that's not the word to use, but you know what I mean? Like in terms of entertainment.
It enhanced what was happening, and that's what the magazine should do. And that's what we could do in a way that other wrestling magazines couldn't. And I think they also enhanced the experience of being a fan, but not in the same way we did. Like, for example, if you're talking about the early 90s, I was also reading the magazine regularly then as a kid. And that was the period where in the pages of those magazines is where the Ric Flair and Miss Elizabeth thing got started, when they put the photos in there of the two of them. She was mine before she was yours, right? That was all in there. And the Rockers breakup was foreshadowed in there. There was the article about friction between the Rockers, and it came up in the barbershop when they had their big blow up. So, I mean, a magazine at one point was really a big part of that product.
The magazine is how Vince Russo first got into Vince McMahon's world, right?
Yeah,
And I remember as a big advocate of the magazines, my family did a lot of traveling. So, I can tell you that Iron Man was the cheaper magazine by like 50 cents on the comics because I got a lot of Iron Mans, right? But I also got a lot of wrestling magazines. And I always thought it was very odd, or not even odd. It was just the WWE magazine, as it started coming out, it had a different flavor because, like you said, it was a direct plug into the company. Whereas all the other magazines, Inside Wrestling, The Wrestler, all the after stuff, like they were all basically fans. They were across the board, every promotion, all the information they could get. You might even get the odd snippet from Japan and things like that. But WWE, it was like plugged in, and it was very different how the articles were written. It was all like from the source. I mean, those older magazines, most of those articles were fake. Even guys, those interviews weren't real.
Well, the outside wrestling magazines, they were trying to do the same thing, but they were just making up their angles and storylines. They would just, and I love that for a different reason. They would make up the most insane kind of dramatic storylines, but it was just made up because they didn't have any inside track. When I was there, you talk about like how the working of the articles and things, and that's true, especially for WWE/F magazine. But when I was there, we were making more of an effort to include the talent. Like more often, the interviews were actually done with them, even if they were in character. And we would still be creative and make up scenarios and things like that. But my editor-in-chief at the time was a guy named Barry Werner, who had been the sports editor for the Daily News. And if you know anything, like the Daily News sports section, especially back then, was one of the most respected sports sections in the country. So he had that sports background, and it's even though he was a big wrestling fan, but he wanted to bring some of that. Like he wasn't totally comfortable just making stuff up out of thin air. I mean, the guy was like an actual sports journalist. So he was trying to bring a little more reality to it, which I thought was interesting.
And something like especially, myself being ESL and just like being so young at the time, reading all the various magazines, WWE Magazine and then the other ones, there was something about the writing in the WWE Magazine where you can tell that it was just different from other ones, where you can tell that it was just written for a specific audience as opposed to a more general audience like the other magazines and even newsletters and things like that. Was there ever like a style guide or something like that you had to follow as you worked for the WWFE magazine?
We never had a style guide, even though when I first came in, I was a copy editor. I was an assistant copy editor. So my boss was the head copy editor, which is a proofreader basically, but you're also checking for facts and things. And I remember one of her big objectives was we got to make a style guide, but it never happened because we were just too busy. And that's happened in other companies I worked for too.
Am I wrong that WWE, the magazine, was mostly color?
Oh, it was totally color. That was our big advantage.
The fact that the other magazines were black and white and actual ink on paper, it just gave it the WWE magazine. It was more professional, but as a child, I didn't really think about professionalism. You just thought like it was so different.
In those magazines, the other ones were really trying to keep up, and they were trying to do color. Sometimes they would have color inserts. PWI for a while had now PWI is all color and slick, but back then they had like an inside color section they would try to do. In fact, I remember at one point when the After magazines went into business basically with WCW, which I guess is a little bit of a conflict of interest, but some of that WCW money got pumped into the magazine. And there was a brief period for a couple of years in the mid 90s where they went all color, all slick for a little while. But that we knew at WWE that was one of our advantages. And what they would always say there, and Shane would always say, our number one advantage is access. We have access to anyone we want to talk to at any time. I basically had a Word document. I still have it, by the way. No one's getting it from me, but it's like a digital Rolodex. Everyone's cell phone numbers. Back then, their beeper numbers, their home phone numbers. Like I could just beep the Undertaker. You know what I mean? Like I could get whoever I needed to get. And from time to time, I've still gone in there and used it for reasons when I need to reach people or whatever. So, I mean, we had the access. We had our own photographers, because everybody knows they kicked out all the outside photographers. They had to shoot from the stands. We had our own guys, and a lot of people don't know this. I don't know if you've ever talked to any of the WWE photographers. They had these microsecond strobe lights set up in the arenas so that when the camera would go off, a strobe flash would hit for a split second. You can't even tell with your eyes. And it would hit the ring, and their pictures were lit up and brighter and more colorful than any other photographer's photos, to the point where I'm like a gritty old school fan. One thing I have to say, even when I worked there, I used to say this, I kind of like the other magazine's photography because it was rougher and grittier, not as perfectly lit and beautiful, and it just looked more grimy. Like I kind of liked that,
Yeah. Like when talking with Tempest, he always says he loves to watch wrestling, especially modern wrestling, at like 360p or things like that, because it gives him that feeling that he used to get. But one thing I wanted to say earlier was the after magazines, when the WWE magazine started coming up, after a little while, they almost had a little more underground validity because they weren't so flashy and they had the dark, everything was black and white and grainy. And so in even going on like Internet Archives and looking up old magazines, it gives you that feeling. Whereas the WWE magazine gives me more of like it was like going from DC Comics to Image Comics. I was like, okay, this is Image Comics, whereas I still have my old DC stuff here, you know?
Yeah, I remember sometimes I would sit because I went up to being managing editor. So I was really, running the magazines at one point. And I used to talk to the photo editors, and we had photo editors sometimes who wanted everything to be super perfect, and they would go through the photos, and sometimes they reject photos because they would go like, well, this guy's all too sweaty looking, or here his face looks weird, and I'm like, yeah, he's getting hit with a chair, or they'd be like, you could see all the wrinkles over here, and when they're doing these moves, and I'm thinking, I dug that because it made it look more like a sport. Like these guys are in there wrestling each other, trying to win a match. They're not modeling, but they just wanted everything to look as perfect as possible.
Yeah, I have a picture here. Funny that we were talking about Fred Blassie earlier. I have a picture here of Fred Blassie hitting Peter Maivia, and Blassie looks great in this photo. But Maivia is literally like, his face is like collapsing in on itself in his neck. He's like, he's in the middle of like selling a punch, and he looks completely insane. If you didn't say, hey, that's Peter Maivia, or you didn't know his tattoos, you would not know who it was. It looks insane, like someone's got a blower on his face or something. But I love that picture because of it.
The impact, yeah, you like that.
And he was selling. He probably did. I don't know if Blassie was heavy-handed, but he was probably just selling too. So he probably didn't actually get hit, which makes it even better.
Right, definitely. Yeah. Sometimes I remember this would happen too, and it was kind of funny. Shane would always, push for the best photos, and sometimes we would show him these great action shots, and he would say like, this is great, this is really great, but I want something better. Like I want to see the impact, I want to see the sweat flying, I want to see the contact. And we would have to go like, well, Shane, they're not really like hitting each other. Like, what do you want to do? It's not like boxing where you get that like Carmen Basilio shot where his face is like,
yeah. See, that's why everybody's like, oh, chopping is so stupid in wrestling. Why do they chop? And I'm like, it's the only time you can get a still shot of a guy like actually getting hit and his chest rippling and his face like selling like, oh, that sucked. So that's why.
Yeah, especially nowadays. In the old days, sometimes they would have a match where the guys would be potatoing each other on purpose just because that was their style, or they wanted it to look really good on that particular night. That would actually happen.
The last time that you were on the show was February of 2024. It was when The Rock came back and the final boss started his run. A lot has changed since then, Brian. What's your take on the way that from the Cody's run to John Cena's retirement? Let's start with Cody's initial run and Cody finishing the story. How do you feel that business went in that sense?
I thought Cody was a very strong champion in the first reign. And, it's one of those things. It's like the build up to him winning the title was so incredibly dramatic and well done that some people afterwards were like, okay, he's the champion. Now what? And I'm just like, not everything is going to be that crazy bloodline Roman Reigns thing. Like business was going well with him as champ, very popular. The fans loved him. I thought they had some good opponents lined up for him. To be honest with you, this losing to Cena, I thought at the time that seemed like the right move, but seeing how badly that heel turn went, and I thought it was going to be great. In hindsight, I almost think like they should have never even taken him off of him at all. They should have just kept it going. But in a way, it kind of kept him fresh, and now he's got it again. And so, it's kind of interesting to see where they go with it from here. I'm one of these guys. I like the old school WWF mentality, which is you put your title on your biggest, most popular star, or if it's a heel, like you put it on like a top heel, like Roman Reigns was, or somebody you want people to chase, like superstar Billy Graham and things like the NWA for years had a different attitude. You put it on the heel and everybody chases the heel. I don't like one thing that you hear a lot to the point where people repeat it because it seems like it's true when people say, this guy doesn't need the belt. this guy does need the belt to get over. And like, I feel like if you're just putting the belt on people that are struggling to get over and need it to help them get over, that devalues the belt in my eyes. That makes it look like the best guy doesn't have it. I like the idea of, you look at the world champion and you go, he's the best. This guy's the best. He doesn't just happen to be the world champion right now. He is the best, and that's why he's got that belt. And I feel like with Cody, they've had that now. They had it with Roman in a different way because he was their top guy, even though he was a heel. He was definitely the top guy in the company. You know, I don't like that idea. Like, well, we put the belt on people that are just ready to come to the next level. No. You need to be at that level before you get the privilege of holding that belt. So, I mean, I've been a big supporter of Cody through the whole thing. I think he's great.
Absolutely, same here. And there's a lot of discussion around that heel turn. But the more I think about things and see kind of the matches he's having now, the reactions he's getting now, I almost feel like that heel turn in a way kind of helped the reactions that he's getting right now in a weird way.
Yeah, it made people appreciate him more, maybe you could say that, because it's funny with Cena. He's a really interesting case. I think he's great. He always gives his best. And when he's at his best, his matches are always top notch. He knows what he's doing. He's also a very decent guy. He's a good guy to have in that spot, and he does business the right way. But there's something about him that people just get bored with. And it's always been a problem. Like, even when he first came back, when the tour started, when he was still a face in the beginning, it was very, very exciting. Everybody was going nuts. And then a couple of weeks in, it started to feel like, oh, yeah. Oh, right. Yeah. We forgot. Now, can you please go away again? Like, it started to feel that way until he turned heel. And now, and the weird thing about the heel turn was, I think one of the reasons it flopped, fans are so weird. It's like, they wanted to enjoy the last Cena run. They wanted to be able to cheer for him and now they're very nostalgic. These are people that grew up with him. They wanted to have that prerogative of the warm and fuzzy feeling, which I don't even think they fully realized until it was taken away. And so they resented, I really think they resented WWE for turning it into that situation. And so they cheered for him even more and supported him even more to make their feelings known. I just think, after all, in the end, people want this to be a feel-good thing. They don't want to have to boo John Cena.
That's exactly it. And I've always said this, and a lot of people have said this, and I'm pretty sure that you and I talked about this at one point, and it's that, you know, at some point in someone's career, these more legendary guys, these more popular guys, at some point in their careers, they just will never be booed. They can't be booed. They will always be cheered no matter what. And I think,
and I also think they didn't know how to follow up with it. It reminded me of the NWO in a way. I mean, the NWO went much better, obviously, but the downfall of the NWO was, after a while, they just didn't know what to do with it. They didn't have an end game. They just kept adding people. They never lost. Like, there didn't seem to be any hope. And with Cena, it was like they just said, "Oh, this is amazing. Oh my God, John Cena turned heel. Now what?" And The Rock left him high and dry. Travis Scott is nowhere to be found, which is probably a good thing. And Cena's just out there showing his ass. I don't know if I could say that, but so then the heel turn just becomes him week after week, like weirdly psychoanalyzing himself in the ring and basically cutting the same promo, but he's not actually doing anything.
You said week after week, but week after week, it was very weak. This whole thing was weak. It was fabulous when it happened. It could have happened at Mania. There's so many ways they could have done it. If The Rock wasn't involved, he could have done the actual turn at Mania, and it didn't have to be quite so heavy-handed. But with The Rock involved, I mean, it was very much an Illuminati kind of thing. You know, John Cena's like part of that actor guild, and Travis Scott is like a famous rapper who's gotten very rich very quick, you know, very like Diddy style, like he could be in the inner circle. Like, they could have alluded to like very evil behind the scenes machinations, you know, The Rock running Hollywood and running this business. And I was even talking about, if you look at Once in a Lifetime and Twice in a Lifetime, you've got them as definitely once in a lifetime, they're not friends. And then throughout that year, Rock's like, "Hey man, like, you know, you want to be part of this? You want to be part of the inner circle?" And then Twice in a Lifetime happens, and he's in Hollywood after that.
Yeah, people wanted more explanations. Like, what happened? Why did you do this? And you're right. I mean, you know, I was expecting more of that, of Cena basically going, "You know what? The Rock was right. I knocked him way back when. I said he was a sellout and he went Hollywood and he didn't have a passion for the business. And I criticized him, but I was young. I was naive. I was wrong. Now I understand. Now I'm where he is. And now I get it. And The Rock was right. Like there's so much they could have done with the two of them. You know, I think books will be written about this in the future. Just all this weird behind the scenes politicking. I think
The Rock is a weirdo.
I think
The Rock's become a complete weirdo.
Yeah, and he's lost a lot of goodwill. And I also think there's definitely behind the scenes factions going on here. Like The Rock has his faction, Triple H has his faction. I don't buy for a minute that they're like playing patty cake together. I know they never liked each other. I can tell you that for a fact, especially back in the day. There's definitely weird stuff going on. I think The Rock, part of that was spite. I really, truly do. I think he did that on purpose. I think he left them dry on that on purpose because they didn't want to do it the way he wanted to do it. And he just stepped away and said, okay, now you deal with it. See you later. I think so.
Egos are something amazing, but who knows what it could have been altogether. But the idea of Cena coming out and being like, you want to know why I turned? Because you fans are such pricks. I was just like, what? Give me a break. Like that was just such an awful reason when they had to come up with a reason out of nowhere. That was a really crap reason.
But I think turning on the fans could have been part of it. The problem was it was the whole thing, because I have no problem with part of it being like, you know what? You booed me year after year after year. You told me I sucked. I did everything I was supposed to do. I shook hands. I kissed babies. I smiled. I never had an unkind word to say while you crapped on me for years. You know what? I'm done. The hell with all of you. Like,
die, Rocky, die.
Die, Rocky, die.
Right. But I'm talking about
same
Cena,
thing,
right? And that's another thing where he could have said, The Rock taught me this. The Rock showed me that the fans are fickle and don't put your faith in them. And the only reason they wound up liking The Rock is because he turned into an asshole. Well, you know what? I'm an asshole now. Like, it could have all been part of it, but the fact that it just became him every week just saying, oh, all you fans, oh, I hate you. Like,
it was awful.
It's the same thing every week.
And they could have even kept The Rock involved. Like, I did a video once where I was saying, like, yeah, Dr. Dre always says, like, I'm a mountain. Like, I don't have to be moved in this business. I'm sorry. So The Rock, you want to know why The Rock didn't show up to WrestleMania? Because he doesn't have to. Yeah, this is Mickey Mouse shit. I got some stuff to do. You guys, Cena, you go take care of that. You're my figurehead now, my consigliere, right? I've let everybody know you're my minion. Go minion. Travis Scott is there too.
Right.
You know,
that would have at least been something, right?
Yes, and even Travis Scott leaving really sucks because the connection, first time we ever saw him was with Jey Uso, and Jey Uso was just begging to turn heel before this yeet thing gets really stinky and old. Like, he needs to go hard, and Travis Scott could have been he could have been part of the Illuminati. The Rock wants me to be part of the inner circle. I'm going to be famous like my brother. He could have been there, you know, wanting to suck on the teat of fame, and now Jimmy's there being like, dude, what are you doing? You know, like, all of it's there, and now all of it's gone because these, like, Hollywood types, man, they're not wrestling fans. They don't care in the end run.
I think they got Travis Scott way too involved, and that was part of the problem. Like, it's okay to have him as part of it on the periphery, but having him there, I hate to say, like, at the moment John Cena turns heel and he's doing all these weird, distracting things that are drawing attention to himself, like, that was a major bungle, even in the execution of the angle. Like, even as it was happening, I'm going, like, what is this freaking guy doing? Like, why is he there? Everything, you're just looking at him. And then what he did to Cody, which is like, I don't know if he got the wrong message or if he just doesn't know how to do that, but that's a bad look. Like, he should have never been in a position to, like, practically break Cody's face. I mean, it's just too much of an involvement. Like, he could have been outside the ring. He could have been in Rock's entourage. Like, he comes out on the ramp and that's kind of all he does. But it was just too much, I thought. And it hurt.
Supposedly, The Rock told him to make it count. If you're going to do it, make it count.
I know, but I don't know if he knew what The Rock meant by that. Make it count doesn't mean break the guy's face. It means make it look really good. At least that's how I would take it.
Brian, do you think The Rock is going to eventually be back in some shape or form?
Well, now they're talking about Saudi Arabia throwing him like an insane amount of money, which means he will be back. I mean, people will follow that money, but like I said, I think he lost a lot of goodwill. I mean, look, it wasn't that long ago. You guys remember, like, The Rock was so beloved, and everybody said, this guy is the real deal. Like, he's the most genuine celebrity. He's a warm, like, real guy. I think he really has damaged that badly. And so I'm worried that he's going to get like go away heat, and he might be forced on people. Certainly there's a way to salvage it, because Rock and Roman or Rock and Cody, there is a lot you could do with either of those matches. There's a lot of baggage in a good way. There's a lot of background. If the fans don't crap on it, it could work, but we'll see. He will be back though, for sure.
Well, you say he's lost a lot of goodwill and he's damaged himself. Well, he's going to damage himself because he's also lost a lot of weight. I mean, the form and fashion he's going to return in, I don't know if he can wrestle, you know, like, give me a break.
Even when he was bigger, it became very clear that he just couldn't do the things that he used to do. He's 53 years old now, and the match with Cody, like that tag team match, it was very clear. You could almost see that he himself was like a little bit surprised at how limited he was. Like, I don't think he realized, like, in that match, I don't think this was part of the script of it, when he just on the spur of the moment turned it into a no DQ, no count out match. Like, he just turned to the referee, remember that, and said, don't count. Yeah. I think that's because he knew, like, I can't do this. We got to get outside in the crowd where I could just throw garbage cans and stuff, and I don't have to, like, take bumps and do things. Like, I really think that was a in the moment decision, because he suddenly realized, like, wow, this is very hard for me now.
Yeah, I never even thought of that. Let's talk about WWE as a business. The last time that we spoke, TKO was just freshly created, and they were freshly a brand under the TKO umbrella. And now we're seeing more and more of that influence, from rising ticket costs to Saudi Arabia hosting Royal Rumble and WrestleMania over the next few years. How do you see this WWE just being part of a larger brand? Like I always say, it's not your granddaddy's WWE anymore.
Yeah, and who would have thought? It's like they actually have now turned Vince McMahon babyface with
right?
The latest thing that Mark Shapiro said. It was just really like, that's the kind of thing that you think or you say in a boardroom. You don't say in a public-facing speech where he goes like, well, Vince McMahon's problem was he was marketing towards families. Oh, wow. What a mistake.
That's a big problem.
Right. Oh, because the thing about Vince is, I will say this, as a businessman, there's a very important distinction here. And I know this for a fact because I worked for the man. He was a ruthless businessman, no doubt. To his competitors, he was bloodthirsty and a cutthroat business person. But he always very, very honestly and earnestly valued his customers. And he called them his customers. Like, he was very much about, you have to make the fans happy. Really, you have to kiss their ass, really make them feel important, make them happy, make it a family experience. That's how, that was his business model, making the fans happy genuinely, because he knew it was good for his bottom line. But this is a very different philosophy of business. This is much more corporate. This is much more of the contemporary way that a lot of these companies do business, which is like, we've seen it happen across sports, where all the sports used to be like that. They catered to families. They catered to the fan experience. It was about the dad and his son going to the ball game. And these big corporations have moved away from that. And now that WWE is owned by a corporation, they're in that same basket. This is the result of not being a mom and pop organization anymore. Even when they went public, I think that's when the corporatization started. But you have to remember, still, 80% of it was owned by Vince McMahon. So the public thing was kind of a farce. It was just a way for Vince to make money off of stocks, options, and things, but it was still his company, and he ran it his way. And those days are over now, for sure.
Yeah, these comments came at a Goldman Sachs conference. So, while 100% true, it was that Simpsons thing where, he said the quiet thing out loud, right? I do understand that the way that they speak in these types of conferences, and there's all these buzzwords in the tech industry, and they talk about annual recurring revenue, and that's basically how much money we can get from one customer, one company, one logo, as they call it. And there was a term used that just irked me, and it was, for me, it was the ultimate reminder that this is now just a corporate entity, and that's ticket yield. They look at ticket yield as the ultimate indicator to how well they're doing in terms of bringing in money for each ticket sold. And it just irked me to the point where, like you said, it's a very different thing. And somehow, Mark Shapiro was able to turn Vince McMahon into a face, even for a couple hours. But to me, that was the craziest part.
Yeah, because you think like, oh, Vince actually cared about us, and these guys don't. Like, that was the gut reaction you have, when you see that.
Yeah, but they were catering to kids for a good period of time throughout the 90s and throughout the whole period of time. He was catering to families because families were his bread and butter. When I think about my local competition here as a promoter, I'm a downtown Toronto guy. I get a lot of hipsters. I get a lot of people looking for something to do. But even the guys who are my direct competition out in Mississauga, some of the bigger, they are getting families. They go to WWE events and Flyer, and they get WWE families. And that's why they come to get signings by Kevin Nash and things like that. So it is a big market. So I don't think Vince was wrong. That was the market he made his money off of, was, prayers and vitamins and Hogan and kids, right?
Wasn't wrong. And the thing about it was, for as cutting edge as he was for his time and innovative, and he was the classic yuppie baby boomer 80s, like next generation businessman of his era. That's what he was. But he came from the old school in a lot of ways. Walt Disney thought this way about his business. I'm sure it's very different now, but he did. He thought of the customers. He thought of making people happy, because the old school way of thinking was, the more happy and contented your potential customers are, the more willing they're going to be to come and support you and pay for things and buy things and come out. If you piss them off, if you don't think about their bottom line and their pocketbook, if you come off as too greedy, that will hurt your business, because the people are going to tell you to take a walk. Now, one thing, I'll let you talk in a second, because I brought this up with Dave Meltzer on Twitter. We had a little conversation about it on there, where I said exactly what I'm saying. And he said something which I think he's right about, because I was saying, is there going to be a backlash? And he said that he really thinks that the fans today are just very different. They don't think that way. They'll bitch, they'll moan, they'll complain, and then they'll just go and do it because they just want their thing, whatever it is. And he's probably right.
You're seeing that right now with ticket prices. Everyone complains on social media, but at the end of the day, we tune to TV, and these arenas are full. I saw it firsthand with Elimination Chamber. Getting into the building, Rogers Center, Skydome, I still call it the Skydome, was, a few $100s just to get in.
No, and I look at these things, I look at it, and I go, yeah, it's packed. And then I turn to my wife, we're watching it, and we're going like, who are all these people? Like, how are they doing this? Like, they're coming out, they're just like, you know what, a few $1,000s to go, well, it's like the thing with Taylor Swift. Wasn't she charging like 30 grand? And people were going, and I'm thinking to myself, even if I was wealthy enough where 30 grand for a ticket wouldn't really hurt me, and it's like, okay, I could do that, I still wouldn't do it, on the principle of how insane that is. And how, when you look at, and I hate to say this, but when you look at those packed houses and you know how much those tickets are costing, not everybody in there is a super rich person. I think, even though they're catering more towards that, I think these are just people digging themselves into a bottomless pit of debt to do all these things. And that's what they're counting on.
I had a friend who went to SummerSlam, and for his 2 kids and his wife and him, and they did like, I think one of the Raws or SmackDowns or something around it. Like, they did a whole weekend and traveled down. He's like, it's destroyed me. He's like, I can't believe how much money we ended up spending. I had something I was going to say earlier, and now I've forgotten. But
you know what? I'll say one thing. I'll jump in then. I will be the first one to say, I took my family to Disney World 3 or 4 years ago. The whole family. We were there for a week or whatever it was, 7, 8, 9 days. And it wound up costing me many thousands of dollars. Yeah. We broke the 5-figure number, let's just say. But here's the thing. That was a week-long experience in like the greatest amusement park on the planet, with 5 people going, not a 3-hour wrestling show and then you go home. Do you know what I mean? Which would have cost the same. That's the insanity, I think, where it's like, I just think, like, what are you getting for this money that you're paying?
Yeah, AEW is cheaper, but it's more like a 6-hour wrestling show. But we were talking about goodwill with families, and I just think that they're not following the doctrine of the Russian spies or like the torture artists. It's not the slow drip Chinese torture. Like this has happened too fast. The ring covered in advertisements, the greed, the ticket prices. Now WrestleMania being announced for Saudi Arabia. I don't even think they wanted to do that yet. Like the Saudis accidentally put it out, erased it, and then WWE had to make an announcement. And so now they've released that, I think, a little too early. It's like Roman Reigns winning the Rumble in 2015 instead of 2016. They're like, oh, it was just a year too early. We needed another 8 months of trickle before we were like, guess what, Saudi? Like we had to wait till after Rumble before we announced WrestleMania in Saudi. But now they've got Rumble and Mania and Saudi and greed and money. And I just think it's happening too fast. And in a world where we all have social media at our fingertips, people have opinions and they're out there and they're not good.
I'll just say this. The smartest thing in the world for Tony Khan to do,
oh yeah,
is run a gigantic stadium show the weekend of WrestleMania domestically. The gut reaction may be, well, everybody's going to be home watching WrestleMania, whether they're there or not. So I think you'd have enough people either among your fan base and also just pissed off that they can't go to WrestleMania who would come out to a major wrestling event. And you got to stack that card. You got to get your Moxleys front and center, your Jerichos, your MJFs, your biggest names, a lot of whom are ex-WWE people. That's fine. Get them front and center. Stack the best card you can do. They'll clean up.
And do it in New Orleans.
And they'll make WWE look bad by doing it.
Oh, do it in New Orleans. That's great. I was going to say major international hub airport somewhere close, like Houston, Miami, New York, where people can come international, don't have to continue into middle America. But that's a great idea. In my opinion, do it in the replace WrestleMania. Give all the local indies that come to WrestleMania weekend and do their shows, give them some place to go. And what you were saying, Brian, was the first round table that I want to do with people. I would love for you to be involved. I want to do these question round tables. And the first question would be like, should Tony Khan stop running from WWE? Stop moving your times. You're a billionaire. If anybody can take this chance, like stand up, stand your ground, and see what you can do against them and stop running. In Saudi, the show's going to be on at like 2 in the afternoon or at noon or something, right? So Tony Khan still has all day to have indie shows and have his big show in the evening. And I think you are absolutely right. They could, bring in Conrad, do your StarCast, do everything. Replace WrestleMania in North America that year and show them what you can freaking do, man. And I think they should start now. Stop running. Stop changing times.
In a major city, right? This would be a great way to fight back in a way where they could feasibly do very well. Like the reason he's running, I think, is in a lot of these scenarios, he knows they're going to get crushed. This is actually an opportunity where they could actually do very well here. Do it in a major place. I don't know, maybe do it in New York. Could you imagine like Citi Field or something, or like that would be crazy. Do it in like a traditional WWE popular place, like, I don't know, Los Angeles or something where they do great business, in Chicago. I don't know,
2 years is a long time for fans to change their mindset. I'm already hearing grumblings about the WWE starting to feel too corporate. Like, this is a company that has already been corporate for a while, but it's starting to feel very cookie cutter. Even my friend the other day, I loved watching the AAA show just recently out of Vegas, like no advertisements on the ring, just normal ring ropes and whatnot. I was like, wow, I love watching this show.
The thing with the corporate stuff, I think when we look back, with more perspective, we're going to take note that the moment we're in right now is definitely, I feel like the latest boom that they had has already peaked. We're in that point, if this was the Attitude Era, like we're at 2001 going to 2002, like we're kind of there. If it was the Hulkamania era, we're like around 1990 going into 91. Like that's kind of where we're at. And I think we'll realize that more as time goes by. We're not where they were at in, like, say 2021, 22, 23. Like it's not that anymore.
Vikingo worked a very WWE style match. That's what I was going to say. I was like, wow, this was very obvious right away. And especially against Dominic, who's basically been trained by WWE and his father, basically, but since day one, as far as on TV. And this whole product felt different and it was very WWEized. So, yeah, the New Japans and the AEWs, like, they're 2 years from now, that style, we might all be looking for something different, not just for an alternative to WWE's, storylines and how bad it was in like 2010 to 2016, but like now an alternative to just like the wrestling being boring.
Yeah, which is what benefited AEW when they first started, is that WWE had been kind of crappy for years, and they stepped in there with something very exciting. But then the problem became WWE got really good.
Yeah.
They got really hot and good again, and AEW was getting worse. It was happening at the same time. Like WWE was getting better, AEW was getting worse, and they were starting to lose people. Like I just was waiting for that turning point when AEW started and everybody was jumping there. I started thinking there's going to come a point where WWE gets aggressive and you're going to start seeing people jump to the other side, including AEW homegrown people that had never been there before. And that's exactly what we saw. And Cody was the first blow. That was the beginning of the switcheroo. One thing that keeps people where they're at is the money. MJF, I believe, very badly would love to come to WWE. And I think when that whole bidding war thing happened, I think that's really where his heart would have been to go. But I think Tony Khan just gave him a number. That was the number that he needed. And he stayed. And I think that's been happening with a lot of guys. There is no other, for example, there's no other explanation that you could give me of why Dustin Rhodes is still there. There is no other reason for him to be there. Zero.
Agreed.
Same thing with JR. Absolutely no reason for him still to be there now, why he wouldn't have gone back at this point, even to just be some kind of an ambassador. It's money. It's the insane amount of money that they get. And that's what probably has prevented it from happening more. I think if it wasn't for money things, I think you'd already see people like Hangman Page, even Kenny Omega. You'd see a lot of these people over there.
Yeah, but somebody has to be out there competing, and the fact that Tony Khan has so many resources, because these wrestlers, they will not get paid a lot. WWE will lowball absolutely everybody. There's the pay-per-view models completely different. Wrestlers, it's tough for a guy like me who can't book Orange Cassidy's and people like that because they're all like, all the indie guys are getting snapped up by Tony Khan. But everybody's making a living now, and people, they have something to work with. Prime example, Josh Alexander. For sure, Josh Alexander wants more from his career and knows WWE will give it to him, but Josh has struggled for a long time with a lot of issues, and he just wanted some damn money. Every step of his career, he's watched Ethan do better than him, and Julian has taken those steps just before him, and I know that with his family, and he's like, he just wanted some goddamn paydays. So he's like, yeah, sign a 3-year, 5-year, whatever, give me some goddamn money, and then I'll go over to wherever. And so you're absolutely right, because he would be in WWE if it wasn't for the fact that that man wanted a nice house and a nice bank account and wanted to not have to worry about if he like broke his scapula or his neck. He's like, I'm fine and my kids are fine.
Yeah. Just remember with Josh Alexander, he lost a few years with not being able to travel into the States, right? Like that's a huge blow financially and just planning for your future and whatnot.
Yeah, D'Amore did him a real big favor when he signed him to TNA and gave him the visa. But same thing with Mike Bailey, sometimes guys screw up on their own account. Bailey did well in the UK and whatnot, but he probably could have been a lot bigger, a lot faster if he was allowed to travel.
We can talk about the current product for hours and hours and hours. Brian, I hope you do come back for a round table and we can do a lot more about the current wrestling product. But let's talk about Irresistible Force, the life and times of Gorilla Monsoon. The last time that we spoke, February of 2024, you were in the process of writing this book. You were still gathering a lot of things, pictures, speaking with his wife and everything. And here we are, just weeks away from the release. How do you feel about the final product? And then talk to me about how the process went.
I'm so proud of it. A reason I leaned over is to get a copy because it's right here.
Yeah.
There you go. And I cannot believe it. First of all, it's huge. You could.
That was the first thing I noticed.
You could hurt somebody badly with this book if you needed to. It could be a doorstop or something. I love it. The cover I didn't realize was going to be embossed. I mean, that is amazing to me. It just looks beautiful. And it's got a huge photo section, more than I've ever done before. There's about 60 photos in here, two different sections.
Yep, that was actually the first thing that I noticed was just how many photos there were, and some of them are photos you would never think that you would see in a
Right.
book like this without the family's participation. So talk to me about that. Like
That
you were basically right there with them, gathering stories, gathering pictures.
that was the game changer. That was the one thing I couldn't get for Blood and Fire, which is the one drawback that Blood and Fire had that this book doesn't have, which is family involvement and photography. My number one wish list thing when I wrote the Sheik book was, can you imagine if I could get a baby picture of the Sheik? My God, that would blow people away. And I couldn't. Well, this time I did. I got the baby picture. I got baby Gorilla Monsoon in there as a little tiny baby, as a little boy, as a teenager, everything, with his wife when they first got married. And his family, they welcomed me with open arms. His daughter, Valerie, made it all happen. She introduced me to her mother, Maureen, who unfortunately has since passed. She died earlier this year. They were, though, immensely supportive, immensely helpful. I would say about 70% of the photos in the book came from them. Plus, I've got all their reminiscences and stories. Maureen was amazing because she was in assisted living at the time that I knew her, and she wasn't very busy. She was just home. She was in her 80s and she lived in her apartment and watched her shows and things. And I would just call her out of the blue and she would answer questions for me. And in some cases, she would tell me crazy things that if I didn't ask, like, how would I have known? And I think to myself, especially now that she's gone, like, what are other things that she knew and saw that she just didn't think to mention? Because she would drop these incredible things on me. And I'd be like, you're kidding. And I'm writing it down, and it's all in there. It's all in the book.
Yeah, like I told you right before we hit record, I just got the physical copy at the start of this weekend, and I have a feeling that by midweek it will be done. And it is a big book. Like that was the first thing that I noticed. But so far, I have kind of, again, like I said, validated a lot of things that I kind of knew about Gorilla Monsoon. But I know that there's so much that I did not know. And you talk about, the loss of his son and how that really, really changed Gorilla Monsoon moving forward and kind of like the later years of his WWE run on TV.
Yeah, that happened July 4th, 1994. And he was pretty much wrecked after that. He lived another 5 years. And, they had already been kind of phasing him out a little bit as the front and center announce guy by that point when Jim Ross came in. And then Vince himself started taking more of an active role. Like Vince started doing pay-per-views, which he never used to do. So he was already kind of stepping back. But the Joey thing really just put it over the top where he just didn't have a passion for it anymore. He still wanted to be a part of it, but that's partly why they made him WWE president, WWF president, because in reality, it's a much easier job. You show up, you're on TV every couple of weeks, you make a proclamation, you go in the back and you're playing cards with Arnold Skoland. You know what I mean? Like you don't really you could kind of take it easy. And I think that's part of what that was. Go into the studio once every few weeks, do some voiceovers. His heart just wasn't in it anymore, unfortunately.
Yeah, and then thinking back to that era, you knew something was different with him for sure at that time. But you said, they were always trying to find him a role because essentially when Gorilla Monsoon sold Capital Wrestling, he was essentially given a job for life.
Yes, given a job for life. That's true. At the time of the sale to Vince Jr., Gorilla was a 20% owner. It was Vince Sr. had 50%, Gorilla Monsoon had 20%, Phil Zacco, who was one of their top promoters, had 20%, and Arnold Skoland had 10%. And the one who had the most to lose from the deal was Gorilla. Arnold Skoland had a small percentage, and he was very loyal, and he would have done whatever they wanted him to do. He was kind of an agent and a manager. Phil Zacco was old, and he was looking to get out. He didn't care. He took his money and he went home. The thing with Gorilla at the time of that sale, he was 37. He was 45 years old. Okay, when the sale happened, He was still very vital, very much a part of the company. And he was now standing to lose a big piece of it on a deal that he didn't even know if it was going to work or not. And on top of that, which I get into a lot of detail in the book, which has not widely been talked about, he had been the original person that was going to take over. He was Vince Sr.'s guy. In a time when Vince Jr. was an untested commodity and they just looked at him as the screw-up promoter's son, which I hate to say, that's how he was seen in the 70s, Gorilla was the guy. And so he had the most to lose. And that's why they gave him the best possible deal to make him happy. And he still didn't make as much money as he would have made. Do the math. Because Vince said, I want all of it. If Vince had said, as was the original plan, I'm going to buy my father out, I'm going to have 50% like he did. I'm going to keep the partners on board. They'll be silent partners. You have your piece, you have your piece, you have your piece. Could you imagine where they'd be at today? Gorilla's family would be billionaires, literally.
Yeah, literally.
Literally
Absolutely.
billionaire. So Gino knew that, all right, if this doesn't work, I'm sunk. If it does work, I stand to lose a lot of money. I'm going to make good money, but I could be making, 1,000 times more than that. So he was actually pretty pissed off in the beginning. They had to make him happy.
Yeah. Is there a story that you learned about Gorilla Monsoon that you didn't put in the book or that didn't make the final cut of the book that you want to talk about?
You could tell by the size of it that I'm not good at leaving stuff out. And I definitely had that attitude. Like I would hear random things and go, oh man, that is great, but where's it going to go? Like somebody told me, this guy, Tom Carlucci, who's all over the book, but he was like Gorilla's driver for a while, hung out with him a lot. And he would tell me how his favorite thing to listen to in the rental car was Richard Pryor tapes. He loved Richard Pryor. And I'm like, nobody would imagine that in a million years. That's awesome. And I'm going, where am I going to put that? But I figured out a way and it's in there. So that's what I mean. Like, all right, I know there's one thing and it's kind of dumb, but it was a funny incident that I just couldn't find a place for. I talk a lot about Gorilla Monsoon and Bobby Heenan and their close friendship and all the funny things they did together. A lot of people may remember they were on Nickelodeon. They were on Double Dare. And they did a whole thing where they were on a game show and they were on opposing sides and they wound up getting slimed, like everybody does on Nickelodeon. Bobby Heenan's taking bumps in the slime. He's rolling around on the floor of the studio. It's hilarious, but just didn't fit anywhere, so things like that. Certain little details that Valerie told me about her dad. His favorite movie was One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest. Couldn't really find a place for that. He loved the movie Grease, and he would flip out at the end when Olivia Newton-John comes out and she's all like sexy. He would just be like all into it, and you couldn't even like talk to him when that part happened. Like little things like that, I couldn't quite fit in. Actually, I will tell you, you know what? I just thought of something, and this is a good one. This didn't go in, and the reason it didn't go in is not because I couldn't find a place for it. It's because it was too late. When Hulk Hogan died, which was July, that was what the book was printing. I talked to Valerie about it. And I said, what was, we never really talked about what was your dad's relationship with Hulk? Like what, we know that he put him over all the time on commentary and worked really hard to keep him over. What was it really like? And she was telling me about how, they weren't like great friends or anything. And Hogan and him were like, it was kind of whatever. But part of that was because of the drug culture of the 80s. Gorilla was very much an anti-drug guy, like to the extreme. Like one story Maureen told me, which is in the book, was they went out to the movies once and there was a guy in the back of the theater. And this was way before any of this stuff was legal, obviously. There was a guy in the back of the theater smoking weed, and Gorilla almost got into a fight with the guy. He was so pissed off, and he didn't even want to be there. And I think Maureen said they wound up going home. Now, that's how extreme he was. So what the story about Hogan was, she said to me that one time Hulk Hogan had a party at his house in Florida in the 80s, and everybody from the company came down to the party, and they're at his house, and Gino and Maureen are there. And at one point, and this is Valerie telling me this, at one point, everybody went upstairs and they were all like doing drugs. And I'm sure it was not weed. I mean, they were doing like hardcore drugs. And Gino turned to Maureen and just said, let's get out of here. Let's go home. I don't want to be a part of this. And they were just disgusted and left. I would have definitely put that in the book somewhere, but it just was one of those things. It just didn't come up, and it was too late to fit in.
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely. It's interesting stories for sure. A lot of great quotes and stories from even people like Bret Hart in the book that I was reading through. Really great book. Like, it goes into such detail. Gorilla Monsoon. He's one of the people who, like, you rarely hear anything negative about.
Right, right. And I'm glad you mentioned that. I always forget. I got to mention Bret Hart wrote the foreword to the book. Bret Hart, who, I'll say it, Bret Hart is more well known than the guy I wrote the book about. I mean, Bret Hart, one of the biggest stars of all time, and he agreed to write this foreword because of the connection that Gorilla had to the Hart family, which I get into in the book. So that was one of the things that was, I'll say honestly, was different from the Sheik book, because the Sheik was not universally liked. You could say a lot of things about the Sheik. I think he was the greatest heel in wrestling history, but he was not universally liked. He had some loyalists, people who loved him. Dave Brzezinski, Dave Drayson loved him. And other people too. Kevin Sullivan had enormous fondness and respect for him. But there were also people that had access to grind and had problems with him. He was a notoriously cheap payoff guy for a lot of people. Les Thatcher told me one time he got a check for $20 for doing a match for him. And so, but with this book, you're right. I mean, it was just overflowing praise and admiration and kind words, to the point where I have a section that starts the book. It's just a spread of quotes from people praising Gorilla Monsoon, because there was just so many that I wanted to put it in one place just to show people how loved he was. Like, this is not the kind of book where you find skeletons and things are dredged up. Like Valerie told me, because, when you do these things, you have to win the trust of the family. You just have to show them that you are, acting in good faith. And so in the beginning, when she didn't know, she said to me, look, if you're looking for skeletons and dirt, you're not going to find anything. She goes, I'll tell you right now, okay? He smoked. He liked to gamble a lot. He ate way too much. And he was married once briefly before Maureen. She goes, that is it. That's all you're ever going to find. There's nothing else. That's the worst. And she was 100% right, because if there was, I would have found it. Because I was digging things up with the Sheik book that I did not know going in, to the point where I'm going, okay, this is why the family doesn't want to talk to me. I think they're worried about all these things. With Gorilla, there's none of that. There's just none.
Yeah. And it's something that I've always found interesting about him, because you always hear something about people in the wrestling industry. But Gorilla Monsoon is one of the very few that you just never heard about anything negative about. And everything that I've read has been just glowing. And actually, it's funny that you bring up that page of quotes, because that was the first thing I noticed. It's right as soon as you open the book and you get some amazing quotes from people like Mike Chioda, Jimmy Corderas, Jim Cornette, so on and so on. It's really heartwarming for someone who just loved the business.
Yeah, and I will say now that one thing I thought of is probably the biggest knock on him, like serious knock, not like I didn't like him as a commentator, but like a serious knock. And I address it in the book, and I try to give my take on it, is the fact that, yes, okay, he was in a position of power, and he essentially looked the other way on the things that were happening in the 80s, the scandalous stuff. And not only did he look the other way, but he made inside jokes about it on commentary, which, some people are uncomfortable with. But I talk about that in the book and the culture of the wrestling business and my take on why that is. Like, I know for a fact that he was very, very disturbed by those things. It really bothered him. It bothered him as much as Bruno Sammartino, but Bruno Sammartino made the decision to walk away and Gino didn't. And that's a big difference. And I think part of it is that's the way the wrestling business was at the time.
Do you think if he didn't have a piece of the company, he might have walked away? I mean, Bruno had that option, right?
I do think it's possible. If he wasn't as well plugged in, he thought to himself, look, I'm not going to rock this boat. I'm taking care of my family here. I'm very well positioned. What am I going to do if this goes away? Why would I do that? And I think that was a very old school way of thinking. And that also went on in the entertainment business. And it was just a different culture. There wasn't as much accountability. There was much more bad behavior that was protected by silence in those days. And I think that was just a decision people made. You keep your head down, you keep your mouth shut, I wrote this book almost like a mob book. The style of writing that I put out and the way I was thinking about it was like the world of the mob, except obviously not, these are not like murderers and thieves, but the world of the mob. But that's one of the similarities. It's like the code of silence. You don't break ranks. This is the business you're in. And that's it. In fact, there's even a scene in the book where Stu Hart, after Owen Hart died, a lot of people forget Gorilla was alive for that. Okay. He was in rough shape, but he was around. Stu Hart called Gorilla up and they're commiserating. They were lifelong friends. They both lost their sons to wrestling. He crossed the line, though, because Stu Hart asked Gorilla to help him to be in the family lawsuit, basically to turn on WWE and help him with the lawsuit. Like, you have all this inside information. And Gorilla said, that's one thing I can't do. I work here. This is my company. This is what I'm loyal to. And he said to Stu something to the effect of, this is the business that we chose. This is the world that we chose to be in. And he chose not to help for that reason. Now, the other part of the stuff in the 80s was, that he would come on the air and make jokes about it. And even that I address in the sense that Bertrand Hébert, Pat Patterson's biographer, had some information from Pat talking about those jokes and things and how he took it in stride and didn't take it as a very serious thing. And I think in a lot of ways, because I knew guys from that generation. My grandfather was from that generation. These guys were all ball busters. These guys they loved to break each other's chops and say outrageous things to piss each other off. And some of the reason was gallows humor. They were making jokes and laughing so that they didn't really have to think about how horrible it was, because otherwise they'd cry about it instead of laughing about it. And I know, again, these things may sound like cop-outs to people, but I think it was a way of coping. They're making these dark, dark jokes about things that they don't think anybody knows about that they're talking to, because these were not public things. I think it was like a coping mechanism, because I know for a fact that he was privately disgusted by these things that were happening. And I think it's just a way of dealing with it. And it was very much a part of the generation that he was a part of.
I agree. I can for sure see that being the case. Brian, I don't want to monopolize your entire afternoon, so real quick, couple questions from the listeners.
Well, too late for that, Boris. I'm kidding. Go on.
And then we'll call it a day. All right, Jake Eleanor, actually, he cross posts a lot with your board as well, and this is what he had a couple questions. I understand that the Wrestling Observer Hall of Fame are putting Gorilla back on the ballot. How confident are you that he can gain some interest in votes for him this year or in the next couple of years?
Yes, so the ballots came out this weekend. I got mine. He's on the ballot. Now, for people that don't know the background of this, the Wrestling Observer Hall of Fame started in 1996, and Dave Meltzer put in a ton of people the first year that was his own personal selections. And then every year going forward, they had a vote, and the vote goes out to a combination of writers, historians, insiders, people who work in the business, wrestlers past and present. And Gorilla Monsoon never got enough votes to go in. I think you have to get like 2/3. You have to be on 2/3 of the ballots, basically, to get in your category. And Gorilla never quite got enough. Part of that was, I think, the Observer itself didn't always have the highest opinion of Gorilla. And that's fine. And Dave Meltzer himself did not. And I think that kind of may have colored the viewpoint. But he never got in, and years and years and years went by. And finally, they have a rule that if you're on the ballot for if you're on the ballot for 10 years and you don't go in, unless you get at least 50% of the votes on your ballot, you drop off the ballot totally. And in 2014, he dropped off the ballot. And I just thought that was insane, because to me, he's like a shoo-in. He should be like a shoo-in. And now he's back. Dave Meltzer put him back on like he assured me he was going to. And he's back, and he's in the non-wrestler category, which I understand, because that's what he's most known for. He has great. I think on wrestling alone, he would deserve to go in. But as far as his career goes, probably his greatest contributions and what he's best known for is in the non-wrestling category. I think with the passage of time and the amount of nostalgia now and reappraisals and assessments and people growing up with him that are now adults and older adults, and maybe even with my book, I will say, I'm going to go out there on a limb. I'm serious. And I say, I think he's going to go in a landslide. I think it's going to be an overwhelming vote. He's going to be one of the easiest ones to get in this year. If I'm wrong, I'll put my foot in my mouth happily, but I think that's what's going to happen.
You heard it here on A Plus Wrestling. Also, second part of this question, also knowing that Gorilla stayed employed with the World Wrestling Federation until his passing in 1999 at the height of the Attitude Era, did we ever know what he thought about the product transitioning over to the adult-oriented trash TV style product? Was he outraged or understandable?
I talk about it in the book, and I don't mind talking about it here because there's tons in the book. He was not happy about it. He was not. He wasn't going to publicly criticize or say that because, again, this is his company. He's not going to, but privately, he was not thrilled. He felt more and more that it was moving away from what he recognized as professional wrestling, the whole product. But I think what bothered him the most was the profanity, actually. It's funny, and again, it's a generational thing. These guys were not choir boys, all right? This vocabulary was colorful. But privately, yes, there was a difference between like, oh, you don't say this on television. You don't say this in front of kids and women and all this stuff. And so he had a big problem with that. He was uncomfortable with it. A lot of the craziness. I mean, like people were telling me that sometimes they'd see him backstage, like Kevin Kelly told me, and Cornette, like he'd be rolling his eyes, like the oddities would show up, or like the Howard Stern people would be there, and he'd be like, "Oh crap, what is this?" You know, like that kind of thing. But he went along with it, partly because it was his company, and partly you have to remember this is that era where he really just didn't care as much. If it was 1987, that might have been different. That was a time when he was known to say, like, don't do that. That's bullshit. Don't do that. But I think by this point, he was just like, who cares? Do whatever you want. And you have to recognize it's making money. He's not dumb. But he was not comfortable with the Attitude Era. I don't think he liked it.
Yeah, Vince still priced tickets for families, but didn't have a product for families.
Yeah. Well, when I worked there, they actually stopped making merchandise for children during the Attitude Era. For people that took note of that, they really did, because they knew that would be something, even though they were still, I don't care what you say, they were still aiming the product partly at kids. You know, all those middle school kids with the DX shirts and everything. But they stopped selling merch to children because they knew that would be a big gotcha that people could jump on. If your product is now for adults, TV 14, why are you selling toys and kids t-shirts and things? So they actually had stopped doing that for a while, but it was still, kids were still watching it. Come on, you know?
I was 12 years old, 14 years old when that was going on. So yeah, that didn't stop me from watching it and telling people to suck it in the schoolyard and whatnot, and getting in trouble, suspended, detention, and all the above.
Yeah, many trips to the principal's office blamed on WWF for sure.
Absolutely. Brian, real quick, if people are on the fence to getting this book, why should they get it?
Oh man, well, if you're curious about things that you never knew about Gorilla Monsoon, you're going to find them in here. Things that have never been laid out in this detail. How in the hell did he turn babyface? This is like one of the most mysterious questions ever. It's like archaeology trying to find it out. He was like this monstrous heel in the 60s. And then all of a sudden he's like this urbane, erudite guy. Like, how did that happen? It's in there. All the stuff about how the sale went down. It's all in there. You know, his relationship with Bobby Heenan. Because I will say this is a big thing of why. Like with the Sheik book, more than just the story of Gorilla Monsoon's life, it is the entire story of the development of WWE during this era, from the Capitol Wrestling days in the 60s through the early WWF expansion period, into the 90s, into the Attitude Era, in extreme detail, like things that people did not know about how this business was run, especially in the 60s and 70s. We don't read a lot about that. It's all in this book.
That's exactly it for me. You know, it's someone who literally had a stake in the WWE during this incredible time, this time of growth, this boom period, and then some.
Hey Brian, I want to follow you. Where can I find you on social media, and maybe even get a copy of your book if you're not so benevolent as to send me one?
Sure, no problem. Well, I'm not that benevolent, but people can follow me on Twitter at Brian R. Solomon. I post a lot of wrestling content there. that my podcast, as you guys said, Shut Up and Wrestle, where it's an old school themed podcast. It's all about wrestling history. I have different guests on every week. People seem to really like it. It's part of the Arcadian Vanguard network that the Jim Cornette shows are on. I also write for Pro Wrestling Illustrated, for Inside the Ropes. I pull that off both at the same time. What else? Oh, I have a Patreon, patreon.com/shutupandwrestle, where I post extra content on there for subscribers, including I do watch along commentaries on there too. And as for the book, you can get it wherever books are sold. I'm really lucky. It's like a wide release. So Amazon, Barnes and Noble, Books A Million. If you have a local bookstore and they don't have it there, they will order it for you. If you're in Canada, I want to say, I don't know if you guys have Canadian listeners? I'm sure you do. If you're in well, you're from Canada, so you better have Canadian wrestlers. But I will say, Canadian listeners from Canada, if you want the book, I think the best way to do it is order directly from ECW Press, because some of the postage and stuff from the US to Canada and things has become insane. Try to order from ECW Press themselves, ecwpress.com. That would be your best bet.
So that is it. September 30th, 2025. Irresistible Force, The Life and Times of Gorilla Monsoon, Brian R. Solomon. Thank you so much for joining us here on A Plus Wrestling. We hope that you will be back for a roundtable or two.
Thank you, guys. I definitely will. Just tell me when. I'll be there.
And thank you so much, Brian, for joining us. It is time for us to call it a week. Thank you so much. I know we didn't get to the business at hand. We have so many previews for you. WrestlePalooza, AEW All Out. Be sure to subscribe to the feeds, A Plus Productions or A Plus Wrestling, this week, because we will have a mid-week show previewing AEW All Out and WrestlePalooza. And as always, we will be back here on KPHR next Monday, chatting the results of AEW All Out and WrestlePalooza and so much more. On behalf of the entire A Plus Productions crew, thank you so much for listening, but most importantly, stay tranquilo.